Because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co. We'll get into some of the things that have got you talking today. Now, we're going to kick off by talking politics. Did you watch the leadership debate last night? I did. What did you think to it? I thought it was like a bad episode of The Apprentice, quite frankly. And they seem to be forgetting that the ultimate victor needs to be the team, not the individual. Do you think these leadership debates are doing more harm than good to the Tory cause? And Labour, they're in the background there setting out their plans. Is the Labour economic view that of the future? And are you old enough to remember the kind of goings-on around the community tax, the poll tax and all of that? Protests and a collective decision by many, I think it was about 17 million, basically not to pay their bills. Well, there's a new campaign now saying that if energy bills go up again in October, there should be a mass movement to cancel your direct debit. I wonder, is it ever a good idea not to pay your bills? Would you consider doing such a thing? And let's face it, we've got a lot of problems in society these days, haven't we? National service often gets suggested as one of the solutions. In some countries, of course, we have a war in Europe. It's being considered having a return to it. Should we be looking at something similar, even if it's not a military programme? Basically a community programme. Where do you stand on that? I'll have that and more with Lord Moylan and Joe Phillips in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's bring ourselves up to date with all the latest news headlines today.
Michelle, thank you. Good evening. It's just gone 6 o'clock. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. The International Monetary Fund is predicting the UK is set to have the weakest economy in the G7 next year. They expect Britain's economic growth to expand by just 0.5% due to rampant inflation, which would be the worst performance among all major economies except Russia. It comes as the IMF warned that stalling growth across the world means we could be teetering on the edge of a global recession. Well, the two candidates to become the UK's next Prime Minister will face off for a second time in 24 hours. Earlier today, Liz Truss claimed Rishi Sunak's plans for the economy would be a disaster for homeowners, businesses and workers, and that they would lead the country into a recession. But the latest IMF World Economic Update appears to imply not cutting taxes and keeping spending down is the way forward, something Ms Truss disagrees with.
Countries like the United States, Canada, Japan have higher levels of debt than us. They're not putting up taxes because they understand that now is the time we need to get the economic growth into our economy to avoid a recession and to make sure that we're attracting business investment and those jobs and growth for the future. I'm sick of this declinist talk, this idea that Britain can't succeed, that we can't compete.
Well, Labour's Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, watched last night's debate and he said neither candidate has shown the kind of leadership the country needs.
I think the debate we saw last night confirms that these are two political lightweights who supported, defended and enabled Boris Johnson to be the Prime Minister for the last 3.5 or so years. What we need is whoever wins to call a general election to give the British public the choice of a fresh start.
People in England are being urged to use water wisely as the country faces drought in August. The Environment Agency is warning the dry conditions have been exacerbated by record high temperatures and lower than normal rainfall so far this year. Most of England has moved into prolonged dry weather status, and the group is now taking precautionary measures to mitigate the impacts. Network Rail is advising people not to travel by train tomorrow unless absolutely necessary due to another day of strikes. More than 40,000 members of the RMT union and 14 train operators will walk out in a continued dispute over jobs, pay and conditions. Network Rail says only 20% of services will run and some places will have no trains at all. To minimise disruption, it's published a special timetable showing many trains will start later and finish earlier. The government doesn't know whether the coronavirus traffic light travel system enforced on those arriving into the UK actually worked. That's the conclusion of the Public Accounts Committee, who say nearly £500 million was spent on the quarantine scheme. That caused huge confusion with 10 rule changes within a year. Arrivals from red list countries had to stay in a quarantine hotel for at least 10 days, but only 2% of those guests actually tested positive. MPs have also accused the energy regulator Ofgem of being negligent. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy says the government needs to change its out-of-date energy bill support for households. The Select Committee added that a massive insulation drive needs to be launched urgently, as it would permanently bring down bills. Well, energy expert Will Hodson told GB News there are things we can all do to cut our energy costs.
Britain has got the oldest housing stock in Europe, right? And we can take pride, I think, in having built houses that were made to last. But those houses are drafty. They leak energy. And if you can plug those leaks, you're going to save up to £600 from your bill. So the message of yesteryear was switch energy supplier to get the best price. I think the message going forward is look for energy efficiency so as to reduce your energy usage.
Amazon is increasing the price of its Prime delivery and streaming service due to what it says is increased inflation and operating costs. The streaming service says prices will rise from £7.99 each month to £8.99 from the 15th of September for new customers or on the customer's renewal date. It means the annual membership price will increase from £79 a year to £95. On TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Now let's get back to Michelle.
Thanks for that, Bethany. Well, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight. We've got my panel, Daniel Moylan, who's a former advisor to Boris Johnson and is a Conservative life peer in the House of Lords, and the political commentator and former spin doctor, Joe Phillips. A short story for you, Joe. Yes. Good evening, both of you.
Good evening.
I always remember the first time you joined my show, and we was discussing a medical story, and I remember someone saying to me, oh, it's OK, because on the panel we've got a doctor. And I said, oh, I didn't think we had. And they said, yes, we've got a spine doctor. And that was you.
I know,
it's spine.
So sweet.
Many people say that. What is a spin doctor? Tell me briefly, what's a spin doctor?
I worked for Paddy Ashdown many years ago, so I was his press secretary and head of his Westminster office. And it's really explaining to or trying to get the media to understand. I mean, bearing in mind in those days, it was very hard, still is actually, to get any coverage for the Liberal Democrats because you're always squeezed out by the bigger two parties, the Conservatives and Labour. But it's actually sort of trying to, chivvy up interest, to try and explain things, to talk about it. I mean, the big question always in those days was, are you going to do a deal with Labour or the Tories? And Paddy was always at great pains to say, no, we're equidistant, we're absolutely equidistant from everybody. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, although I think spin doctory has taken on a slight element of the dark arts, wouldn't you say, Daniel?
Well,
since your day, Joe.
Yes, exactly.
I think it's gone downhill.
Yes, I think so.
That's probably the case.
Well, you tell me at home, because if you are a regular viewer, you'll know the drill by now. It's not just about us three, it's about you at home as well. I want you to get in touch with me tonight and tell me all your thoughts. What do you think about spin doctors, by the way? Good idea. Do we need such a thing in politics still? Did we ever need them? No offence, Joe. You tell me your thoughts on that, and also the stories that we will be discussing tonight. Did you watch that leadership debate last night? I thought it was like a bad episode of The Apprentice. That's what I said at the start. Lots of you getting in touch already on that. John says the Tories are absolutely crazy having this absurd leadership contest in public. The only winners here are the enemies. It should have been conducted in a dignified manner behind closed doors and then the winner announced to the general public. Well, that is John's thoughts. You can tell me yours at gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email. You can tweet me as well if that's your kind of thing, GB News, or at Michelle Dewbs. The stories tonight, as I mentioned, we'll be talking politics. What do you reckon to all of these leadership debates in public? The right idea or not? We'll be looking at Labour. What are they doing in the meantime that the Tories are tearing a strip off themselves? I also want to talk to you about, are you old enough to remember the goings-on with the poll tax? You know, were you one of those people that took to the streets? Did you refuse to pay your bill? There's calls now for people to cancel their direct debit in October once the energy prices go up again. Is that a good idea or not? Would you even be taking part in such a protest? And also as well, I want to talk to you about national service. Many people say it's time that we had a return to it. Is it? That's the stuff I'll be getting into tonight, and a bit more as well if I've got time for it at the end. But let's get into politics, shall we? Did you watch it last night, the battle between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak? I don't actually think it's going well. I think it's reflecting quite poorly on the Tories, actually, because lest they forget that they actually need to win the election, and all of this kind of toing and froing and criticising, you know, if they think that that's not going to be thrown back in their face come the next election, you know, they're onto a fool's errand with that. The former Tory minister, Lord Fowler, has warned that the Tories risk being called the nasty party again. Sunak last night was in trouble for repeatedly interrupting Liz Truss. Many of you already emailing exactly that same thing, which is you didn't think he let Liz Truss get a word in edgeways. Let's have a look at that.
Under my plans, we would start paying down the debt in 3 years' time. So I'm not putting it on the never. I would start paying it down in 3 years.
Liz, that's simply not right. You promised almost £40 billion of unfunded tax cuts, £40 billion more borrowing. That is the country's credit card. It's our children and grandchildren, everyone here has kids. We're going to have to pick up the tab for that.
Excuse me. That is the strategy that I'm going to start adopting, because often on Dewbs & Co people will interrupt us and interrupt each other all the time. I'm going to start Liz Trussing them. That's what I'm going to do, Daniel.
You need to do, Michelle. You need to be a strong woman.
You tell me, because I think your party, Daniel, are being incredibly foolish at the moment, taking part in all of these kind of televised arguments. I don't know what they're trying to achieve. You can reach the leadership, the membership base with a variety of hustings. You could do separate conversations. I don't see how your party's going to fare well off some of these.
Well, I think what you've got to start with is that British democracy is a pretty rough and aggressive sort of thing, and all the better for that. And any idea that all of this should be done elegantly behind closed doors, I think, is anti-democratic and anti our tradition. I do agree with you that the Conservative Party has launched itself on a precarious course. Getting rid of Boris and the way in which he was got rid of was not a good look. And then you go into an election and people shout at each other a bit too much. And I agree that, you know, it doesn't all look great. But there's something very important going on here that people haven't really picked up on. For the first time in 20 years, we've got leading conservative politicians actually having a serious argument about the economic policy that this country should follow. We haven't had that because there are real fundamental differences between Sunak and Truss on where the economy should be going. So if you can listen through all the rubbish about earrings and loafers and shoes and actually listen to what they're arguing about, and I think a lot of people are listening to it, there's a really important debate going on. And the direction our country takes is going to be affected by who wins that. But I'm supporting Truss.
I find this really peculiar. I'll bring Joe in a sec, because When I listen to some of the conversations that have been had in these debates, when I listen to you, when you say, oh, yeah, you know, this is really interesting economic conversation being had, the Tories have been in power pretty much for, what, 12 years now?
Yeah.
And when I hear people saying, oh, yeah, we're having the conversations that we should be having, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, it's almost like people are acting like there's this brand new clean slate. What have you all been doing for 12 years?
Well, the economic situation has changed dramatically over the last year, and how we react to it is the solutions that we had, and that we, indeed many of which we shared with Labour, with Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, those solutions, in my view, aren't fit for purpose anymore, and we need different types of solutions. Rishi Sunak doesn't agree with that. That's a fair point of view. And the fact that that should be debated now in these changed circumstances of war in Ukraine, galloping inflation, high prices for inputs to the economy and for important things like food and fuel and so on, the fact that we're having a discussion about that, and post-COVID, which nobody had predicted, and the effect that had on the economy and on government finances, it's not surprising that you might want to think about having a different economic approach.
Where do you stand on it all, Jo?
Well, I have to say, I just find the whole spectacle completely unedifying. I mean, I slightly agree with you, Michelle, because I sort of think, you know...
Steady on, careful.
I know it's dangerous territory, this, isn't it? You'll sack me. But, you know, if only, or rather only Conservative members can vote on this, so why is it being broadcast on umpteen television channels, you know, into everybody's home? I mean, I know you don't have to watch. I think the standard of debate is appalling. I think that Daniel is right in saying we do need to have a conversation about the economy of the country, given what's happened that is out of our control and other things that are within our control. But as you say, these two have been sitting around the cabinet table for a long, long time. The Tories have been in power for 12 years. It feels like they're trying to rewrite history. And in the debate last night...
In what way?
Well, it feels like they're...
I mean, they've been having these arguments around the cabinet table to some extent over the last couple of years. Now they've burst out into the open. Isn't that a good thing, that people can hear what's going on?
But
and of course, the broadcasters don't have to broadcast these shows.
No,
they're the ones who want to do it. So nobody's forcing the broadcasters to run these debates. And why shouldn't people see what the choices are between the person who's going to be the next Prime Minister?
Because we don't have, those of us who are not members of the Conservative Party, don't actually have a choice.
But it's still, even if you don't have a vote, you'd still want to see and you'd still want to have a view of what's going on. And, of course, ultimately, it's the MPs, it's the person who's Prime Minister under our Constitution is the person who commands the confidence of the Commons. And it's the MPs. Boris was elected by the members to be Prime Minister, but he lost the confidence of the House of Commons, and he's no longer there. So, or won't be shortly. So, you know, it's ultimately the MPs who decide, and this is a hugely important debate people are having. I agree it's scrappy. I agree there are times when it sounds disedifying.
It's puerile.
Well, I think that's a bit excessive. That's what British politics sounds like. You go to Prime Minister's questions, it sounds puerile. But nonetheless, there is a serious debate this time going on, which we never had before. When Boris stood against Jeremy Hunt, there was no serious debate about policy going on.
But Daniel, I don't disagree with you about having a serious debate.
It's really interesting,
but
I think,
actually,
that they're having this debate.
if you have them, fine. But then it needs to be done in a much more well-mannered way.
Well, you think this is because you think British politics is like...
No, I don't.
It should be like a university seminar.
No, I don't.
But that isn't what people
For goodness'
are like.
sake, I've been around Westminster and politics, you know, for as long as you have, and I know perfectly well the bear pit. But if you are trying to get your message across, it is the job of the moderator, if you like. I mean, you know, that little clip that we saw just then, anybody and any man, and I'm sure you feel this, Michelle, quite often, when men interrupt and talk over women, you've automatically lost the support of virtually every woman watching.
I would never interrupt and talk over you, Jo.
I know.
Are you listening?
Yes. You see, he waited until I finished.
See, there was this big sense, actually, that Rishi was kind of getting a bit frantic.
He was getting frantic, wasn't he?
Do you reckon?
Yeah.
And the whole thing about, you know, they spent 5 minutes last night talking about earrings and loafers.
Yeah.
You know, that's not important.
But that's the stupidity of the press.
Well, actually, it's the stupidity of Nadine Dorries, actually.
Well, yeah, she did. She tweeted that out,
fueling that sort of thing.
But then I just thought it was really weird the way that the orchestrators of the debate wanted to focus in on such trivial details. But I want to ask you at home, by the way, how important do you think this is in terms of who is going to lead the Tories next? Because let's be honest, you know, apparently there's going to be a general election in, what, less than 2 years? Do you know how many months it is, to be precise?
Well, the last date would be December in 2024, wouldn't it?
So what's that? Let's just round it up. Let's just say 2 years. Let's just say about 2 years' time. Well, do you think that... I've started a maths challenge now. Do you think that this leader actually has a mandate to govern, by the way? You know, what do you think? There's been this campaign to get Boris added to the ballot paper. It's got about 10,000... He's got about 10,000 signatures to that. Joe says, oh, for goodness sake. What do you think to that? Boris being on the ballot paper? Nonsensical or what?
I don't think Boris can be on the ballot paper now in that way. I do think, if I just give me 1 second on this, I do think that the Conservative MPs have made a mistake in thinking that Boris is the sort of political figure who just vanishes like Mrs. May vanishes. You know, we don't see her again except sitting there with her arms crossed. Or even John Major or someone like that. Boris is a huge political figure, and even Boris untethered, you know, just wandering around, is going to be a pole of attraction away from the Conservative... Or distraction, away from the Conservative Party and the government, even if he's not trying to be, for quite some years to come.
There's a wonderful article in The Times today written by William Hague, which says, you know, prepare for the enormous sulk. Because Boris Johnson...
But even if Boris did nothing, he'd still be out there as this
But you're always going to
He has this latent
You've got this
political
divisive
power.
thing. And actually, if he had any credibility and any dignity, which he clearly doesn't...
No, he has great credibility and dignity, and I stuck with him right to
I
the
know
end.
you did,
but I don't think you need to make gratuitous comments like that to make your point.
But I think he would actually say to the 10,000 people who have signed a petition, I've gone, that decision's been made, we need a united party. So that would be a dignified response.
But
I think he has said today that he doesn't support this.
I think that decision is going to cost the Tories. I'm fascinated. I mean, a lot can happen, let's be clear, right? A lot can happen in 2 years or whatever it was we've just been calculating.
2 years is a lifetime.
Yeah, it is in politics. So a lot can happen. But if there was an election tomorrow, general election tomorrow, I think that the Tories would be deeply impacted by the decision to oust Boris Johnson. It's almost like a coup, I regarded it, and I think that would impact the Tories. We've just been saying that about having a debate about the economy, should I say, one. Keir Starmer had a lot to say on this yesterday. Should we take a look at his vision?
Whether it's the cost of living crisis, as Rachel has said, or recovering from the pandemic, our economy is weaker than our competitors, less resilient, brittle, and ultimately we're all poorer for it. That's why I'm clear. Labour will fight the next election on economic growth. There is no task more central to my ambitions for Britain than making the country and its people better off.
Have you noticed, by the way, that everyone seems to stand now in front of the flags? Was that always the case? Was it? Was I not paying attention enough? But to me, I found that quite interesting. Their 5 points, their 5 principles, Labour's 5 principles are the following. We will be financially responsible. We will be distinctly British. That makes me laugh. What does that even mean? We'll work in partnership with business, re-energise communities and spread economic power, refocus investment on boosting productivity. Winning formula?
That is spin, you see. That means most of that is pretty meaningless because it's a bit like motherhood and apple pie. Everybody wants to do better. Everybody wants to make stable economies. Everybody wants to do better for the British economy. I think the Labour Party, to be fair, have been in a slightly difficult position for the reasons that Daniel mentioned earlier. You know, the COVID pandemic basically knocked out every conversation for 2 years. And, you know, other things have taken them. They need to put more flesh on the bones. They're beginning to put their policies together. You know, and it is always said that opposition parties, you know, they can win elections by default. It is for, you know, governments to lose elections. They're not going to win an election on that sort of waffle, frankly. They need to put some bones on it, some meat on it. He's said he doesn't want to go down the route of renationalisation. The TUC are very keen on that.
And that's a major policy shift.
It is a major,
2017,
absolutely,
2019,
absolutely.
That was always
but,
in that.
but you know, as Rachel Reeves said earlier today or yesterday, you know, that was a policy from Jeremy Corbyn that saw them get the worst results since 1935. They've had to reinvent themselves after Jeremy Corbyn, but I think Keir Starmer's problem is he's too cautious. He needs to be bolder, and he needs to say, what does this mean? In the same way that every time somebody says, oh, we need more for this, whether it's police, NHS or whatever, the government response is always, we've spent X billion pounds. That doesn't mean anything to most people. What you need to say is, we've spent this much money, that has meant this many extra nurses or police officers or whatever. Translate it into human language.
Go hard or go home. That is my human language. That's what Keir Starmer should be doing, putting himself out there. Daniel, very briefly.
Well, Joe has some very wise comments, but I'd just like, since it's brief, I'd just like to disagree with Keir Starmer in saying that our economy is performing worse and we are less resilient than our competitors. Germany is preparing to close down factories for the winter and ration hot water. Italy has lost its government and is practically broke. I mean, we are much more resilient than most of our competitors, and we're doing relatively well. And that's completely false. That's false spin that he just puts out there to give background to his case. It's not true.
Distinctly British. I'm still trying to ponder what that even means. It's got flags there, so it definitely means something. Simon says, Michelle, I'm a Tory party member and think this leadership contest is an embarrassment and fantastic ammunition for Labour. Simply cannot believe that my party is being so stupid. Derek says, I sometimes wonder if our politicians actually understand anything about our country and its people at all, because to me, he feels that they don't seem to care. Graham says the public don't elect the leader of a party and they have no vote, so there is absolutely no reason for a televised debate at all. Leslie says, who cares who wins? I voted for Boris and my vote has now been trashed by the party that I always used to vote for. Keep your thoughts coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk is my email address. I'm going to take a quick break, and while I'm on it, you can ponder this. Would there ever be a scenario where you would just decide, I'm not going to pay my bills, the energy bills? There's a new campaign that's hotting up that's calling on 1 million people to cancel their direct debit in October when we get rising prices again. Will you be one of them? You tell me. gbviews@gbnews.uk is your email address, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Tonight on The Mark Steyn Show. All eyes on the Netherlands as Dutch farmers continue their fight against net zero and a major airport limits the number of flights taking off to fight climate change. Eva Vlaardingerbroek won't be letting those issues slide. The German government admits the COVID booster vaccines have caused health complications for 1 in every 1,667 people. We'll be taking a closer look at their official report with Dr. Claire Craig. And Natalie Winters has uncovered a link between the Wuhan lab and monkeypox. Those stories and more on The Mark Steyn Show tonight at 8 o'clock.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight. My panel, Daniel Moylan, who's a former advisor to Boris Johnson and is now a Tory life peer in the House of Lords, and also the political commentator and former spin doctor, Jo Phillips. Good evening to both of you, and also, of course, to all of you at home. Lots of you getting in touch about that debate. I've got to say, you're pretty split down the middle. I would say about half of you are saying it's absolutely right that this conversation is being had on television, so you can put it up to scrutiny. The other part of you is saying it's absolutely ridiculous and is going to serve only the opposition in the end. Let me know if you have strong views on that one either way, but for now, let's move on and talk to you about your bills.
I'd like to know whether anybody's had their mind changed from watching one of the debates.
Oh, there you go. Jo's got a question for you. Are you a Tory member? Or, you know what, you can get involved in this even if you're not. Have you sat there and thought to yourself, right, the one that I'm going to put my money on is Liz or vice versa, Rishi, and then you watched last night and you thought to yourself, no, I've switched my mind? Jo's asking, are any of you out there that switched? You tell me, gbviews at gbnews.uk. I'll be interested to see the answer to that as well, myself. Because I just think, ultimately, you know what, the main thing for me is the cost of living. You know, you've got one person that says, I'm not going to cut your taxes, I'm not going to do anything right now. You've got another person that basically says, I'm going to, shower like confetti, all of this kind of cash-saving incentives to you.
And they've been in government for 12 years, and they've sat round the cabinet table.
Indeed, and this is one of the key issues that I know you're all struggling with at the moment, which is how you're going to pay your bills. Times are getting really tight for a lot of us at the moment, aren't they? Soaring gas and electricity prices. And now the charity National Energy Action say, get this, more than 8 million households could be in fuel poverty in October. Now, I'm not old enough really to remember all this, but back in the 90s there was lots of protests about what became the poll tax, people refusing en masse to pay. About 17 million people said that they're not going to pay that tax, and they were quite effective in it. And now there's a campaign that's been set up called Don't Pay UK. What they want is 1 million people to come together and en masse cancel a direct debit if the energy price cap is increased on October the 1st, which, let's face it, is pretty much looking likely. Money-saving expert Martin Lewis as well, he's warned that there could be what he calls civil disobedience, perhaps in this form of mass non-payment if these bills keep rising. And I mean, I use the word if quite loosely because, let's face it, they're estimated now to pass the £3,000 a year mark. I'll start with you on this one, actually, Jo. Do you think it's ever acceptable just to say, no thanks, I'm not going to pay?
Well, there are many questions here. I am old enough to remember the poll tax and the campaign against it. But that is a slightly different thing. That was a political policy brought in by the Thatcher government, and then there was a huge protest, as you know. It was brought in Scotland first off as a sort of a trial, and then the can't pay, won't pay, which I think was, was one of the notches that began to weaken the Thatcher government. That's a different thing. This thing, the don't pay campaign, who are they? On their website, it doesn't give you any indication of who they are, and I think that's fine. Direct debits. Not everybody pays by direct debits. Lots of people have to have prepayment meters. It sounds a little bit middle class. Of course, people are going to be pushed into terrible poverty. And, if we have as bad a winter as we've had a hotter summer, there are lots of people who are going to suffer. I think there are cases when you don't pay your bills. And in fact, where I live in the southeast, Southern Water have been pumping sewage into the sea, and lots of people have said we're not paying our water bills. But the people who are going to be most frightened about having their gas or electricity cut off are probably going to be older people or people with young children. And they will be too frightened to do this. Who are these people who are saying, don't pay your bill? How are they going to support and help people if they are cut off?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sentiment here, and I'm not condoning this, by the way, I'm not encouraging people to not pay their bills, just want to put that out there for the record. I'm just exploring this methodology of collective action. Because, Daniel, there are a lot of people that are genuinely afraid right now. Times are getting, well, for many people, they're not getting, they've already gotten incredibly tough. 1 in 5 has an average weekly shortfall of £60 between what they earn and their outgoings. 1 in 5. And I think a lot of people are very worried. So when you hear this kind of sentiment of, oh, you know, is there this opportunity for me just to not pay, quite frankly, I think it might be appealing for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, I don't support this campaign, and it isn't really an opportunity not to pay, because if you cancel your direct debit, you still owe the money, and you just end up being issued with writs eventually and summonses, and you get affects your credit rating and so on. So I wouldn't encourage anybody to do this, especially those who are poor and vulnerable. I go back beyond the poll tax. I'm much older than Joe, I'm sure. I remember when I was quite young, when in the early 70s, when the price of petrol went up threefold very, very quickly because of the oil shocks and the wars in the Middle East, the Israel-Arab wars. And the fact is, when you get wars and interventions like that affect the supplies of crucial inputs to the economy like fuel, we are poorer as a result. And pretending not to pay, saying I'm not going to pay my bill unless you keep the bills down, is sort of running away from reality. We are poorer. Now, that means we are going to have to pay a lot more for our energy in the future, in my view, for quite a long time to come. And the question is not, can the government make that not happen? The question is, what can the government do to help the poorest and most vulnerable about this? And of course, they have done, Rishi Sunak has done some things. It might be that it has to be more, but I think people have to get used to the fact that, you know, as a result of what Russia is doing, energy is going to cost a lot more, and that will have not only household effects, but big knock-on effects through businesses and into the prices of other things as well. And we've got to be quite realistic about this and not run away from it. We have to understand the consequences.
But there are some people who literally will not be able
I understand that. I'm sorry, I didn't say otherwise.
No, I know.
But there are some people who literally will not be able to pay, and there has to be some means of helping them, and the government has done something towards that in a rough and ready way already. But the general idea that if you just don't pay, the price won't go up, I think that's completely misleading. It's a form of denial of reality.
I think it's... Well, I just want to know more about who these people are.
And I want to know more about them
and
as well.
whether they're going to support people who end up with county court judgments or credit ratings and things like that, because, you know, it can be, as Daniel said, rather damaging. I mean, I think there are a whole load of other issues here. You know, this the person who was on in the news clip, or the clip that you played earlier, you know, talking about home insulation. There's a lot of stuff that can be done to make places more energy efficient. We're already seeing across Europe how they're going to cut the use of fuel in preparation for the winter. So daft things like, you know, air conditioning on the doors of shops wide open, letting all that energy out, turning the heating down in offices and buildings like that. There's a lot of stuff that can be done. But, you know, the reality is, for somebody who is old, frail, ill, or has got small children, who's on a fixed price meter or a prepaid meter, and is trying to keep warm, dry and healthy, it's going to be really, really tough in the winter. And I don't know quite... I mean, I know Daniel just said Rishi Sunak has done some things to help, but I mean, I can't remember what it was called, but the last Green Homes grant or whatever, it folded after less than a year. You know, all these things come up. They're never given enough chance to succeed. They're not promoted properly. They're not done in a joined-up way with local government. I mean, I've been waiting for over a year for my county council, which does this sort of collective solar panel thing, to get back to me, because I would like to have solar panels on my house.
Would you like to have solar power panels on your house? Is that a luxury that you reckon you'd be able to afford? Kevin says, all these folk suggesting that they're going to refuse to pay their bills. I hope they're going to hand back any government handouts that they've received towards their bills, if they do indeed do that. Derek says, well, I know a bill that everyone should cut. That is the BBC TV licence fee. Jim says, one thing that never seems to be getting mentioned, Michelle, are the standing charges. I've got to say, I agree with you on that one, Jim. I do think it's a very peculiar calculation that they seem to apply there. Wilka says, go on then, go and cancel your direct debit and see how it feels to sit in the dark with no heating. Nigel says, if you don't have the money, you can't pay. It's not simply an option if you won't pay. If all your money's gone on food and clothes or whatever, there simply is not any money. Gareth says it's a great idea to cancel your direct debit in October, but I'd go one step further and have a mass withdrawal of your bank accounts for one day as well. Yeah.
Why?
Ray says, I remember the whole situation with the poll tax, and one of my friends was sent to prison for non-payment. He says it was absolutely the wrong approach not to pay. If you're struggling, people, pay what you can and ask for dispensation or spreading of the payments, but you should pay something. Non-payment is stupid and rash, says Ray. Well, there you go. You told those people, Ray. Let me know your thoughts. Are you someone that would consider not paying? And if so, would you be worried about the consequences? And just for the record, again, before I don't want to get in trouble, I'm not suggesting that you don't pay your bills. I'm simply exploring people's reactions to the cost of living crisis. And let's face it, it's going to get a whole lot worse. Now, going to take a quick break. When we come back, let's face it, there's a lot of problems in the society, isn't there, right now? They seem to be getting worse, don't they? Not better. And often, many of you guys will email in and say, bring back military service, that'll sort them all out. Will it? I have to say, a number of European countries are discussing bringing back national service in the wake of the war in Ukraine. So I'm pondering, should the UK be considering similar? Seems a bit extreme, doesn't it? But where do you sit on it? GBViews at gbnews.uk is the email. I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, he stood up to the cancel culture mob and left one of the world's most successful bands. Now Winston Marshall is thriving as a political podcaster. I'll sit down with the former Mumford & Sons musician to get his take. Plus, is the BBC guilty of ageism? I'll hear from legendary broadcaster Liz Kershaw, who claims that after 20 years of working on BBC Radio 6 Music, she was sacked simply for being a woman over 60. There will also be fierce opinion from Nigel Farage and women's rights activist Sharon Davies, and I'll round up the headlines for the day with my superstar panel: former Daily Star editor Dawn Neeson, former Tory London mayoral candidate Sean Bailey, and author and journalist Rebecca Reid. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry, keeping me company until 7 o'clock tonight. My panel, Daniel Moylan, who's the former advisor to Boris Johnson and now a Tory life peer in the House of Lords, and the political commentator and former spin doctor, Joe Phillips. If you've just joined us, you've missed the conversations that we've just been having about the Tory leadership debate and also the conversations about energy, about whether or not people are going to be stopping paying their bills very soon. Jill says, Russia is laughing because we're suffering such high energy bills. So much for the West winning the war in Ukraine. So much for the sanctions. The war could have been avoided, and now the West is paying way more for this than Russia is. Many of you guys getting in touch as well, saying do not stop paying your bills. Your credit rating will be affected, and things then will only get worse for you. Simon's emailed in saying all of these people that are desperate to work from home will soon change their mind and be desperate to go back to the office when they start getting their energy bills coming in. Where do you stand on it all? Get in touch with me, GBViews at gbnews.uk, let me know. Coming up next at 7 o'clock, Nigel Farage joins us. Nigel, good evening to you. What have you got?
Good evening. Well, we'll be covering the Sun debate tonight, which has ended dramatically. We don't know what's happened, but some incident in the studio, possibly something happening to Kate McCann. We just don't know at the moment. But we'll be looking at the content of last night's BBC debate and asking ourselves, why was there nothing on illegal immigration? Why was there nothing on law and order? Are the media doing their job? We'll also be looking at the drought. Is this 1976 all over again? We'll be discussing homelessness, the cost of living. It's a full menu.
Sounds good, and we'll see you at 7 o'clock. Yeah, lots of you emailing in saying, what's going on with a leadership debate? I don't know. I'm busy having the fun here at GB News. That's exactly where you should have been all this time. What have you been doing? Right, let's move on. Let's talk about the war in Ukraine, shall we? It's leading some European countries to rethink national service. On the continent, just 8 of the 28 EU countries employ some kind of military service, but that is changing. Latvia is the first country to act, and in early July, its defence ministry announced that men aged between 18 and 27 will have to complete 11 months of military service. So tonight, I'm asking you, do you think it's time for Britain to consider a return to some form of military service? I have to say, I've done this job a little while now, and lots of times I've had people emailing in to various social issues saying, go back to national service, that'll sort them all out. Lord Moylan, where do you stand on it?
Well, I think it's you have to ask why people want to do it. And if it's because you need it for military purposes, because you need to bolster your armed forces through conscription, then I'd look at the case. But I don't see any soldiers or generals or people demanding that. We can still fill our army on a professional basis, and it's a better army for it. So I don't think we need to do that in this country. Now, circumstances may change. And I don't think we should be doing it for social reasons. I think the idea that you should fill up the army with people who don't want to be in it because it's going to be good for them, is that good for our armed forces, is the question. Is it good for our defences? So I'm generally very sceptical about these calls for national service the whole time. Let's just remember, the government, the state, takes control of the upbringing of children, what they learn during every day of the term, from the age of 5, more or less, or earlier, through to the age of 18 now, and they decide what they're going to learn. If they haven't, at the end of that, learnt some of these things that national service is meant to do, about how to behave properly, how to go to work and things like that, how to have some discipline in the way they organise themselves, what have we been doing with them at school?
Daniel, a lot of 40-year-olds don't know what they're doing and how to behave.
It is true, a lot of people don't know what they're doing most of the time, but then the question is, you know, what do you get out of having another 2 years on top of the, everyone is meant to be in training, education or employment up to the age of 18 nowadays under this current rule. You've got them up to the 18, now you're going to say it's going to be up to 19 or 20.
Well, it doesn't have to be 2 years.
Or 6 months or a year, whatever it is. You're just adding more and more on. And yet that's an admission of failure as to what you might have achieved.
So that's a no from you. You don't
no.
want military service. Joe?
I think it's two questions here. Ukraine, when Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, reintroduced conscription or introduced it for the first time. That's why they were so able to respond when Russia invaded this year. So I think there's a different thing there about having the bodies, if you like, and the capability. But I think, the idea of I'm not thinking Dad's Army, I'm not thinking of It Ain't Half Hot Mum, but that sort of, every person just going into the army. The army doesn't want people who don't want to be there. And modern warfare is actually not necessarily about boots on the ground. It's about cyber security. It's about all sorts of other things. I mean, I would say that there are some fantastic career opportunities in all the armed services, from medical to catering to driving to mechanical to engineering. And there are brilliant degree courses and apprenticeships that people can do. But I think there's another question, which I think Daniel touched on in a way, which is this idea that there should be some sort of post-school civil conscription compulsory thing. Gordon Brown, I seem to remember, came up with the idea of a national volunteer civic society scheme, which I don't think ever saw the light of day.
It doesn't sound very catchy.
No, well, I mean, obviously it went completely through me, but... and I do think there is an element of... And I don't think you can expect schools to do absolutely everything. If you have got parents who are unable or unwilling, schools can't make up for parenting. And I do think...
I couldn't agree more.
Lots and lots of young people come out of school through nobody's fault, but they don't know how to behave in the real world. They don't know about turning up on time.
But Joe, how is another compulsory or even voluntary 6 months or a year designed by the Department for Education going to correct these things if it hasn't corrected them earlier? And it won't improve the parents.
No, but I think...
So it's just extending, effectively, the education system.
But there may be a way of thinking about something a little bit more...
And are people going to have to do it if they go to university?
Well, exactly.
Is this going to be your gap year? That you're going to have to do your gap year, whether you like it or not.
Or if you're going to study medicine, you're excused.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean,
lots of you guys are in touch. This one seems to have really got you talking this topic today about should you have some form of national service. Hambles made me laugh, saying, do we really want the armed forces? I'm half pondering whether or not I should read this out, but it made me chuckle. Do we really want the armed forces filled with a load of non-binary trans teenagers arguing with each other about their rights? How would that work at all? Harsh Hamble, I have to say, but it did make me chuckle a little bit there. And I was also just thinking then, I've got a little boy, and if anyone tried to conscript him...
You'd fight like a tiger?
I wouldn't fight like a tiger. I'd tell him to identify as a girl and get himself out of there. You can do these things these days, Joe. That's what I'm
but it'll be compulsory for boys. All these new schemes are equally applicable. The ones in Europe include men and women, so you wouldn't get out of it that way.
Sandra says this is a great idea, and I've been saying it for years. It would turn this country around. It would make people learn respect and turn them into real, respectful people. But what would it consist of, though, Sandra? Are we talking here about a pure military situation?
Well,
I mean, would the Army even want them? Would the Army or the Navy want to...
And the implication there is that they would learn respect because they'd be responsible to military officers. They'd have to respect their military officers, but they don't respect their teachers. Well, maybe they could learn respect if we actually had a better idea of respect for teachers in schools. You don't have to put people into the Army to learn respect, do you?
I know, but that's because what I would say to that is there's not much discipline in schools these days. Kids can run amok. I think that schools are quite...
well, it depends on the school, I think it's fair to say.
And it depends on the teachers.
Yeah.
True. But the discipline, the Army, I would imagine, does not... Not that I've ever been in the Army. I imagine it does not lack discipline.
You could do any number of things, you know, whether you were doing a Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, whether you're in the Scouts or the Guides, whether you're, you know, sailing, climbing, doing any sort of sport.
There are lots of
all of those
opportunities.
things require a level of discipline and commitment and things like punctuality and all of those other things. So maybe we need to make those things more available, because the only way that you make national service work is by making it absolutely compulsory, at which point people are going to go, why? And, you know, what's your excuse? No, I'm going to go on to university, I'm going to, you know, be a doctor or a vet or something.
I'm going on interrailing for a year.
Barbara's been saying absolutely not to this conversation. We're not a dictatorship, Michelle. If I was a young person, I'd tell you all to sling your hook. Gareth says it would be hilarious to see the entitled Generation Z types doing national service. They literally would not know what had hit them. William says, let's do it, but make it voluntary. But I don't know if that kind of undermines... Yeah, if you're going to get people to choose, do you want to do it or not? Yeah. Michelle, you should bring... Some of my viewers are a bit harsh. Keith says, if you brought national service in with the youngsters of today, the second a sergeant major shouted at them, they would cry and be seeking a safe space. Helen says, why would it just be men having national service? Aren't we supposed to be striving for equality? John
you said it was men.
No, I said that I would get my kid to identify as a woman to get
you're
right.
Yeah,
I'm just not trendy enough.
You're not.
You haven't kept up on that.
Yeah, I'm not trendy enough. I'm not cool enough. What can I say? David says, Michelle, as someone who works with people aged 17 plus, this is a damn good idea. Make it 2 years long. David said, it wouldn't work, Michelle. Let's face it, 85% wouldn't make the medical. Ooh, harsh. Right, that is all I've got time for. Lots of you have really hit onto something there about this national service. Patrick says, Michelle, if people want to change the world, start by making your bed. There you go, good advice. Get your bed made.
We'll be in uniform next time.
Oh, hello. That's a completely different show. Joe and David, I'll leave talks of uniforms for a different day. Have yourselves a good night, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Hi there. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. After a relatively cloudy day in many places, there'll be an increased chance of clear spells developing overnight, and under those clear skies it will feel cool. Still 1 or 2 showers around as we end the day and go into Wednesday, but on the whole, high pressure is building in from the west, and that means winds are lighter and skies are getting clearer compared with earlier in the week. So actually, the best of the clear spells overnight will be across Western England, central Scotland, parts of Wales. There will be some areas of cloud elsewhere and continued showers for the north of Scotland as well as parts of eastern England. But under clear skies, well, many places will see temperatures dip into the low double figures or even the high single figures. A more comfortable night for sleeping and a fresh start to Wednesday. Plenty of sunshine around first thing, especially for northern and western England, Wales, southern Scotland. Quite quickly the cloud will build and it will tend to fill in, so a rather cloudy afternoon, broken areas of cloud and a few showers. Many places avoiding them though, and 22 to 24 Celsius in the south, 18 to 21 in the north. So feeling pleasant with the lighter winds and where we do get some bright spells, but certainly no return of last week's heat on the horizon. Now into Thursday morning, early hours, we'll see thicker cloud across some central parts of the UK. Areas of rain or showers here. Either side of that, some clear spells, but with a cloudier night on the whole, it's a milder night. Temperatures in some urban areas not tipping below 16 Celsius.